Her Poisoned Kitchen and the Chef Who Survived. 1. The first time Isolde Mirethane boiled water in the West Wing kitchens, the water hissed at her. It did not simmer. It hissed. She stared at the pot, wooden spoon trembling in her grip as thin curls of steam rose and twisted like displeased spirits. The cookmaids behind her exchanged looks. One of them made the sign used to ward off ill fortune. I assure you, Isolde said with dignity, though sweat trickled down the back of her neck beneath the stiff silk collar of her gown, water is the simplest of culinary preparations. The water spat. The flame guttered out. The pot cracked down the center with a sharp report that echoed against marble walls. Silence followed. Isolde blinked at the split pot, then at the puddle spreading over the stone floor. Somewhere, faintly, a maid whimpered. 2. Before the cracked pot and the scandalized kitchen staff, before the silk gowns and the title whispered through palace corridors, there had been fluorescent lighting and microwave meals. Isolde had once been called Lena Myers. She had been 25, living in a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a refrigerator that hummed like an elderly dragon. She worked late shifts at a small accounting firm, surviving mostly on instant noodles and grocery store pastries. Cooking had never been a strength. She burned toast. She once managed to set off a smoke alarm with oatmeal. The night it happened, she had fallen asleep at her desk with a paperback novel open beneath her cheek. The novel had been dreadful. A predictable romance set in a Western fantasy kingdom filled with heavy brocades and heavier sauces. The villainess, Isolde Mirethane, the thorn of the West Wing, was notorious for plotting against the gentle heroine, Lady Celestine Roquefort. She framed her, attempted slander, and eventually lost everything before being banished to a damp countryside estate. Lena had scoffed at the melodrama and read until her eyes blurred. She remembered the hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of oversteeped tea, the sharp ring of her alarm. Then nothing. She had woken to the scent of beeswax candles and lavender sachets. Silk draped over her skin, a canopy bed towering overhead, and her own reflection staring back from a gilded mirror, pale as porcelain, silver blonde hair cascading in deliberate waves, violet eyes too sharp to belong to anyone who burned oatmeal. Isolde Mirethane, the villainess. She had screamed. The maid who entered nearly fainted. 3. In the novel, Isolde was clever and ruthless, skilled in court intrigue. Lena, now wearing her face, had neither the appetite nor the skill for manipulation. She avoided Celestine entirely for the first month. She declined invitations. She hid in the West Wing, reading cookbooks in a desperate attempt to understand at least one thing in this world. Because the food, dear heavens, the food. The kingdom of Elveris prided itself on grandeur. Banquets were spectacles of gilded platters and roasted beasts dripping with fat. Every dish was assaulted with spice blends imported from the southern deserts, cumin thick as dust, crushed chilies scorching the throat, cloves that clung stubbornly to the tongue. Cream was scarce, reserved for ceremonial dishes. Herbs were used sparingly, more decoration than ingredient. It was loud food, heavy, aggressive. The first banquet Isolde attended, she forced down a spoonful of stew so thick it nearly stood upright. Her eyes watered, the spices burned. Around her, nobles sighed in bliss. She excused herself early, claiming a headache. That night she wept quietly over a memory of simple cream soup and soft bread from her old world. The next morning she marched into the West Wing kitchens and declared she would cook for herself. That was when the water hissed. 4. 3 weeks later, the milk curdled without heat. She had merely looked at it. It separated in the bowl like an accusation. Another day, a pot of rice swelled ominously before detonating against the lid, grains plastering the ceiling like snowfall. The head cook, Mistress Agnet, a formidable woman with arms like carved oak, cornered her after the rice incident. "My lady," Agnet said carefully, eyes flicking to the cracked tiles still being scrubbed, "perhaps it would be wiser to leave the culinary arts to those trained in the craft." Isolde clutched her cookbook tighter. "I am trained. In what discipline, my lady?" She hesitated. Accounting did not seem relevant. "I have read extensively." Agnet inhaled slowly. The next day, the cookmaids refused to enter the kitchen while Isolde was inside. Word spread. The thorn of the West Wing now possessed a cursed ladle. 5. The stew incident happened on a grey afternoon heavy with rain. Isolde had decided on something modest. Carrots, onions, a small cut of beef. She chopped carefully, tongue caught between her teeth, brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Gentle heat, she murmured, adjusting the flame. The broth simmered. For a moment, hope bloomed. Then the surface rippled in unnatural patterns. The oil separated. The liquid divided into murky layers, one pale and trembling, one dark and viscous, one strangely iridescent. It smelled uncertain. Agnete stood at a distance, arms folded. "My lady," she ventured. Isolde tasted it. Her eyes watered instantly. Her knees buckled. She coughed, choking, waving for water. The kitchen doors creaked open at that exact moment. A tall man stepped inside, rain clinging to his dark hair, traveling cloak damp at the shoulders. He paused at the sight of chaos, the layered stew, the trembling staff, the noblewoman gasping over a ladle. He removed his gloves slowly. "I was told the West Wing required a cook," he said. His voice was calm, even. Isolde wiped tears from her eyes and squinted at him. "You," she croaked, gesturing weakly toward the pot. "Eat that," Agnete gasped. The man approached the stove without hesitation. He studied the stew with the grave focus of a scholar examining ancient script. He dipped a spoon, lifted it, inhaled once. Then he tasted it. The entire kitchen held its breath. He swallowed. He closed his eyes briefly, as if committing something to memory. Then he set the spoon down. "I will require fresh stock," he said. Isolde blinked. "You did not die." He regarded her. His eyes were deep blue, clear despite the rain, framed by lashes too dark to ignore. "No," he replied. She straightened, composure snapping back into place. "You are hired." 6. Darian Halbrecht had once been the pride of the royal kitchens. At 16, he had recreated a forgotten dessert for the queen using only scent as guidance. At 19, he supervised banquets for foreign dignitaries. Nobles whispered that he could taste a sauce and name each ingredient down to the soil from which the herbs were grown. He had loved cooking. He loved the way butter softened beneath warmth. The slow blooming of garlic in oil. The quiet rhythm of knife against board. It was a craft that demanded patience and attention. Then came palace politics. The head steward demanded he alter recipes to flatter certain factions. Spices were overused to impress visiting lords who equated intensity with sophistication. When Darian objected, softly at first, then with growing firmness, he was reminded that kitchens served crowns. One evening, after a banquet where his cream-based poultry dish had been drowned in unnecessary pepper at the steward's command, Darian removed his apron and left. He opened a small inn outside the capital for a time. Cooked simply, honestly. It was peaceful, until a messenger arrived from the West Wing with a letter bearing the Mirethane seal and an urgent request for employment. He had hesitated. Then curiosity won. The stew nearly ended that curiosity. And yet, he did not die. 7. Isolde observed him closely over the next week. Darian moved through the kitchen like a quiet tide. No wasted gestures. He corrected her grip on the knife without condescension, simply adjusting her fingers and stepping back. "Your thumb," he murmured once, guiding it inward. His hand was warm, firm. She froze. The kitchen air felt different. She swallowed and resumed chopping. The carrots were uneven. He did not comment. When she added salt, he gently tapped the back of her hand. "Wait." She stiffened. "It requires seasoning." After reduction, he said, "Taste, then decide." His voice held no mockery. Only certainty. She scowled but complied. The result was edible. Her eyes widened. "It tastes like food," she whispered. "It is food," he replied. She stared at him. "You are extraordinary." He returned to the stove. "You have enthusiasm. That is not a compliment." It was not meant as insult. 8. Their arrangement evolved quickly. Officially, Darian was hired as her personal cook. Unofficially, he supervised her like one might supervise an unpredictable storm. She insisted on assisting. He insisted on guarding the flames. The first successful dish was modest: chicken simmered in cream with thyme and rosemary, served with soft bread and sautéed mushrooms. Cream was rare in Elveris, associated with indulgence rather than everyday dining. Darian procured it quietly through old contacts. The scent alone was enough to make Isolde grip the edge of the table. When she tasted it, she closed her eyes. The cream coated her tongue gently. The herbs whispered rather than shouted. The chicken was tender, yielding without resistance. She let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Darian looked away quickly, pretending to adjust the napkin. "We cannot keep this to ourselves," she said suddenly. He paused. "What do you propose?" "A tasting room," she declared, eyes shining. "For nobles weary of burning their tongues. That number may be smaller than you think. You would be surprised." 9. The tasting room began as a rumor. A small chamber adjacent to the West Wing garden, previously used for afternoon tea, was cleared. The heavy tapestries were replaced with lighter linen. Windows were open to allow the scent of herbs to drift outward. Invitations were discreet. An alternative supper, the notes read. By appointment. The first guest was a minor baroness known for complaining about indigestion after banquets. She arrived skeptical. She left with red-rimmed eyes and an empty plate. "It was gentle," she whispered, dabbing at her cheeks. "I could taste each leaf." Word spread faster than Isolde anticipated. Within weeks, the tasting room was booked nightly. Nobles accustomed to heavy gravies found themselves leaning over bowls of velvety soup, hands trembling slightly. Some laughed in embarrassment at their own reactions. Others sat quietly, staring at their spoons as if rediscovering a forgotten language. Darian watched them with measured calm. Isolde watched him. He tasted every dish before it left the kitchen. Not greedily, reverently, eyes closing briefly, shoulders easing. Once, she caught herself staring too long. He glanced up. Their gazes collided. Her pulse skipped. She dropped a spoon. 10. Lady Celestine Roquefort arrived on a moonless evening wearing a cloak far too plain for her rank. Celestine was nothing like the fragile heroine Lena had read about. She was luminous, yes, golden hair braided elegantly, blue eyes bright, but there was mischief tucked in the corner of her smile. Isolde nearly choked on her own breath when she recognized her. In the novel, this was the woman she was meant to torment. Instead, she found herself curtsying awkwardly. "My lady," Isolde said. Celestine pulled back her hood. "Please, no titles tonight. I heard whispers of a sanctuary in the West Wing." Isolde blinked. Sanctuary? For those abused by pepper. A snort escaped Isolde before she could stop it. Darian stepped forward, bowing politely. "I am Darian Halbrecht," he said. Celestine's eyes widened slightly at the name. "You left the palace kitchens." "I did." She smiled slowly. "Then perhaps tonight is a rebellion." The dish served that evening was chocolate mousse. Cocoa was rare in Elveris, traded at high cost from southern caravans. Darian had saved a small supply from his inn days. Celestine took a spoonful. Her posture stiffened. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her lashes were damp. "Do not tell anyone I wept over dessert," she murmured. Isolde's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I would never." 11. Prince Octavian Elbridge did not weep over dessert. He stormed into the tasting room 3 nights later with 2 guards at his heels. Octavian was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied neatly at the nape. His expression was perpetually sharpened, as if he expected offense at every turn. He stopped short at the sight of nobles seated peacefully around small tables. "What is this?" he demanded. Isolde rose slowly, smoothing her skirts. "A private supper, Your Highness." "Private," he repeated, gaze narrowing. "With half the court in attendance." Darian stepped forward before she could retort. "We offer lighter fare," he said evenly. "There is no harm in that." Octavian's eyes flicked to him. "You are Halbrecht." "I am. I heard you abandoned your post." "I resigned." A tense silence settled. Octavian's jaw tightened. "I have been informed that certain dishes here mock traditional cuisine." Isolde's spine went rigid. Mock, she echoed. He gestured sharply at a bowl of pale soup on a nearby table. That. Darian moved without haste. He ladled a small portion into a clean bowl and held it out. Then taste it, Your Highness. Octavian hesitated only a moment before accepting. He tasted. His brows knit faintly. He took another spoonful. Silence deepened. Finally, he set the bowl down. It is bland, he declared. The nobles at the table stared at him. Darian inclined his head slightly. Perhaps Your Highness would prefer to demonstrate refinement in the kitchen. Octavian's eyes flashed. A challenge. A friendly exchange, Darian replied. Isolde's stomach dropped. The duel was set for the following week. 12. The palace kitchens had not seen such anticipation in years. Octavian arrived clad in tailored black, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. He selected spices with bold gestures, layering them generously over roasted lamb. Darian worked beside him with quiet focus. Cream simmered gently in his pot. Fresh herbs were chopped with precise rhythm. He tasted once, adjusted slightly, and continued. Isolde stood at the edge of the kitchen, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. When Octavian's dish was presented, it gleamed with oil, spices clinging visibly. Darian's was modest in appearance, pale sauce, tender slices of chicken, a scattering of green. The tasting judges, 3 elder nobles known for blunt opinions, sampled both. The first coughed after Octavian's. The second reached desperately for water. The third's eyes watered so profusely he removed his spectacles. Then they tasted Darian's. Silence. One of them exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. I can breathe, he whispered. Octavian's face darkened. Darian bowed slightly. The prince turned abruptly and left without another word. Isolde released the breath she had been holding. Darian approached her afterward, wiping his hands on a cloth. You looked ready to faint. I was, she admitted. He studied her face, a faint curve touching his mouth. You worry loudly. I do not. You grip furniture. She glanced down at the dent her fingers had left in the wooden table. He leaned closer. It is endearing. Her pulse jumped violently. She swallowed. Do not say things like that. Like what? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. 13. Winter crept in softly. The tasting room grew cozier, candles flickering against frost-touched windows. Business flourished beyond expectation. Nobles requested private lessons. Letters arrived from distant estates inquiring about lighter menus. Darian began drafting simple recipes. Isolde hovered nearby, occasionally dusted with flour. One afternoon, determined to contribute meaningfully, she announced she would attempt croissants. Darian froze. Croissants, he repeated carefully. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. Very well. The dough refused to cooperate. Butter leaked. Layers collapsed. Isolde flung flour across the table in frustration, leaving white streaks on Darian's dark vest. He stared at the flour. Then at her. She burst into helpless laughter. It bubbled up uncontrollably, shoulders shaking. He tried to maintain composure. Failed. A laugh escaped him, low at first, then fuller, surprising even himself. Flour dusted his hair. She reached out impulsively to brush it away. Her fingers grazed his temple. The laughter faded slowly. The kitchen felt smaller, quieter. Her hand lingered. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared he could hear it. She swallowed. If I ruin everything I touch, she said softly, breath unsteady, why do you stay? The question hung between them. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached up and took her flour-dusted hand gently, examining it as though it were something delicate. You ruin nothing, he said finally. You simply require supervision. Her laugh came out shaky. That is hardly romantic. He stepped closer. I am not known for romance. The air was warm from the ovens. Butter and sugar scented the space. She became acutely aware of the small scar near his jaw, the steady rise of his chest. His thumb brushed absently over her knuckles. Something inside her unraveled quietly. She rose on her toes without planning to. He met her halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, lips brushing lightly, as if testing unfamiliar ground. Warmth spread instantly through her chest. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his vest. He deepened it slightly, one hand coming to rest at her waist, firm but gentle. Flower dust drifted around them like soft snowfall. When they parted, both breathing unevenly, the croissant dough sagged pitifully on the table. She laughed again, softer this time. "We have destroyed France," she murmured, though France did not exist in Elvaris. He rested his forehead briefly against hers. "Then we shall attempt it again." 14. Spring arrived with green shoots pushing through thawed earth. The tasting room expanded to include a small garden dining area. Celestine visited openly now, often dragging a reluctant Octavian behind her. The prince never admitted enjoyment, but he no longer criticized. One evening, as lanterns glowed softly among blooming vines, Isolde stood beside Darian watching guests savor cream-based chicken beneath the stars. "You look different," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "How so?" "Lighter." He considered this. The scent of rosemary drifted between them. "I had forgotten," he said slowly, "that cooking could be this." She reached for his hand. Her fingers fit naturally between his. Around them, nobles laughed softly. Spoons clinked against porcelain. In the distance, Celestine was arguing cheerfully with Octavian over the last spoonful of mousse. Isolde leaned her head against Darian's shoulder. The night air was cool. The kitchen fires glowed warmly behind them. She no longer feared cracked pots or curdled milk. Because even if water hissed and rice exploded, he would be there. Supervising. END. Thank you for listening.